now we come to the final part, which is the uveal tract. So what is the uveal tract? The uveal tract, as we said in the first part of the lecture, it is the middle vascular layer of the eye. So it is mainly responsible for nutrition of the eye by providing blood supply and the nutrients. And they are protected externally by the outer fibrous layer formed by the cornea and sclera, as we mentioned. And it is composed of three main tissues. The first one, most anterior, is the iris and the ciliary body. And finally, posteriorly, we have the choroid. Functions of the uvea. So apart from providing the blood supply to the most of the eye through the anterior and posterior ciliary arteries, what are other functions of the uvea? As we said, as we discussed in the trabecular meshwork, we mentioned that the trabecular meshwork, the aqueous, is formed by the ciliary body. So which part of the ciliary body? It is the ciliary process. And which part of the ciliary process? It is the ciliary epithelium. And which part of the ciliary epithelium? It is the non-pigmented ciliary epithelium. Another function of the uveal tract, which is more concerned with the ciliary muscle, is the accommodation. So a ciliary muscle has attachment of the zonule, and by contraction and relaxation of the ciliary muscle, this will affect the zonule, leading to increasing or decreasing the convexity of lens and increasing or decreasing the accommodation. Also, as we said, that the ciliary muscle has a longitudinal fiber which is attached to the scleral spur. By contraction of this ciliary muscle, this will lead to opening of the scleral spur or traction over the scleral spur, leading to opening of the trabecular meshwork that promote the aqueous drainage. So let's start first with the outermost layer and most posterior layer, which is the choroid. What is the choroid? The choroid is a vascular sheet that forms the most posterior part of the uveal tract, extending from the optic nerve posteriorly to the ciliary body anteriorly. It has a main function of providing the blood supply and the nutrition for retinal pigment epithelium and the outer half of the sensory retina, while the inner half of the sensory retina is supplied by the central retinal vessels. Also, it has melanocytes that has the function of absorbing the excess light that penetrate to the retina through the retinal pigment epithelium. So if we have excess light that enter into the eye, it may scatter within the eye and leading to impairment of quality of vision. And this is the function of retinal pigment epithelium, or the function of the choroid that has melanocytes to absorb this excess light. So it acts like a sunglasses to the retinal pigment epithelium. So again, this is the reddish one. This is the choroid. So the choroid extending from posteriorly from the optic nerve and pass into anteriorly toward the ciliary body. So this is the choroid, and its function mainly as a vascular sheet is to supply nutrition to the photoreceptors, which lies just close to it. It extends from the optic nerve posteriorly to the ciliary body anteriorly. So here we have one exception. There is one layer in the choroid. It's called the choriocapillaris that does not end at the ora. It doesn't end at the ciliary body, but it ends at the ora serrata. So this is very important and very hot topic in the exam, usually asked, that the choriocapillaris does not end at the ciliary body, but ends at the ora serrata. The color of the ciliary body is usually brown due to presence of melanocytes, which is more thick, or the thickest part is at the posterior pool. It's about 0.25 millimeters maximum at the macula to provide maximum nutrition for the central cones or the central photoreceptors. And as we go further away from the macula, then they gradually thin to be 0.1 millimeter. So it is more or less like the sclera. So the sclera is more thick posteriorly and thin anteriorly, as well as the choroid is more thick posteriorly and more thin anteriorly. So it is firmly adherent to the sclera. The choroid is firmly adherent to the sclera, especially at areas of perforation. So at where the optic nerve perforates the eye and where the posterior ciliary arteries enter the eye and at the entrance of vortex veins. And this has a clinical significance in choroidal detachment or bullous choroidal detachment. So they will be the areas of vortex vein will not detach, making this characteristic pattern of choroidal detachment or bullous detachment of the choroid. Also, it is firmly adherent to the retinal pigment epithelium. This is another important fact. So let's have a clear idea about the structure of the choroid. What are the layers of the choroid? So from outside to inside, this is the sclera, as you can see, and this is the choroid, and this is the retina. The choroid is formed mainly from 3 layers. From outside to inside, from outside is called the lamina fusca or suprachoroid. So this is the space between the choroid and the sclera. So the sclera and the choroid are not closely adherent to each other because they are separated by a potential space called the lamina fusca or suprachoroid. Then the most of the thickness of choroid is formed by the vascular layer. And finally, we have the inner layer, which is called the Bruch's membrane. So here is the choroid. The choroid, as we said, it is separated from the sclera by a layer called the lamina fusca, which is consisting of elastic tissue and collagen fibers, as we said in the sclera. Become more dense posteriorly and more loose anteriorly, and it has the perforation of, or has the important value of this space that it contains the long and the short ciliary nerves and arteries. So if you remember, we said that the short and the long ciliary nerves and the arteries enter the eye from posterior around the circumference of the optic nerve. So when they enter the eye, where shall they pass or where shall they go? The posterior ciliary arteries and the nerves pass into the suprachoroidal space or lamina fusca for short space, while the long ciliary arteries and the nerve pass into the suprachoroidal space anteriorly until the choroid is finished. So they will continue into the supraciliary space till they reach the anterior segment of the eye. And their brown color will be attributed to high content of melanocytes. So remember just a few things about lamina fusca, whether in the choroid or whether it is in the sclera. It is brown in color due to presence of melanocytes, and it consists of elastic tissues and collagen fibers. Then we have the vascular layer. So the vascular layer, as we can see here by electron microscopy, is a network of blood vessels that will supply the photoreceptors that will consist of 3 main layers. From outer to inner, we have the outer vessel layer of Haller. So Haller is a large veins, and this is the large vein. Haller vessel will lead to the vortex veins. So this is the artery that will lead to drainage to the vortex veins. Then after Haller, we have a medium-sized layer of Sattler. So it is a medium-sized of vessels. And finally, we have the choriocapillaries, which are a fenestrated capillaries that extend again from the optic disc to the ora serrata, not to the ciliary body, as we said. So what is meant by fenestrated? Fenestrated means that there is holes within the choriocapillaries, or that the choriocapillaries has some fenestration that enable exchange of nutrients and oxygen and some products from inside and outside the choriocapillaries. As we said, the maximum density for the choriocapillaries is present at the macula to provide best nutrition for the central cone, and they have this central lobular structure having this feeding arteriole, then feeding the main artery, then choriocapillaries, then there will be draining venule, then draining veins. So they have a lobular structure. So to summarize, we have vascular layer, the middle vascular layer of the choroid, formed by 3 layers that change in the size from outside to inside, from outer to inner will be decreasing in the size. So the outer vessel layer will be the largest, Haller. Remember Haller for Hulk, so Hulk is large. Middle vessel layer of Sattler, so remember Sattler for small. So they are smaller than Haller. Choriocapillaris will be the most inner layer that adherent to Bruch's membrane. Bruch's membrane is the most inner layer of the choroid. It extends from the ciliary body anteriorly to the optic disc posteriorly, and here we have some connections. So connection of the Bruch's membrane, it is continuous anteriorly with the ciliary body as basement membrane of the ciliary epithelium. While in the optic disc tissue posteriorly, it fused with what's called intermediate tissue of Comte. And let me draw this for you, so we will be able to have a better idea about it. So here we have the eye. Here is the iris. Here is the ciliary body. And here is continuation of the ciliary body, which is the choroid. That ends at the optic nerve. Again, this is the iris. This is the ciliary body. This is the choroid, which end at the optic nerve. So all layers of the choroid end at the optic nerve, except for the choriocapillaris, which ends at the ora serrata. So we have a layer here called the Bruch's membrane. So the Bruch's membrane, let me just change the color. So the Bruch's membrane is the most inner layer, which is adherent to the retina. So this is the most inner layer that adherent to the retina and retinal pigment epithelium. So when the choroid ends, what happened? This Bruch's membrane will continue into the ciliary body as what's called the basement membrane of the ciliary epithelium. So this is called the basement membrane of the ciliary epithelium, which is the anterior continuation. While posteriorly, there is what's called optic disc. Here is the optic disc. The optic disc has a specific connective tissue that we will talk about in the optic nerve lecture. So one of these connective tissue at the lateral edge of the optic disc from here and from here is called lateral edge or lateral tissue of Comte. So the choroid or the Bruch's membrane is becoming attached to it. So if we have here, this is the optic disc, and this is the Bruch's membrane. The Bruch's membrane is attached to the lateral tissue of Comte. Okay. So again, Bruch's membrane extends from the ciliary body anteriorly, and it is continuous with the basement membrane of the ciliary epithelium to the optic tissue optic disc posteriorly, fused with the intermediate tissue of Comte, and it arises from the choriocapillaris from the outer layer, and the inner layer comes from the retinal pigment epithelium, consisting from the outer basement membrane and the inner basement membrane. So the outer basement membrane will be that of the choriocapillaris endothelium, and the inner basement membrane will be that of the retinal pigment epithelium, and contain outer collagen layer and inner collagen layer, and in the middle there will be elastic fibrous layer. So again, here is the section of the Bruch's membrane. You can see that the Bruch's membrane is consisted of 5 layers. From outer, formed by the basement membrane of the choriocapillaris. Here are the choriocapillaris, which are responsible for nutrition to the photoreceptors. So here is the basement membrane of the choriocapillaris and the basement membrane of retinal pigment epithelium. Then we have outer collagen layer and inner collagen layer, and in the middle there will be middle elastic layer. So this is a nice photo for the structure of choroid. So you can see here from the suprachoroidal space or the lamina fusca that contain the perforation, that contain the long and the short posterior ciliary nerves and arteries. Then we have the vascular layer consisting of the large vessel layer of Haller middle smaller vessel layer or medium-sized vessel layer of Sattler, and finally the fenestrated capillaries of the choriocapillaries. And then the choriocapillaries will be resting on the Bruch's membrane. So the basement membrane of the choriocapillaries will form the most outer layer of the Bruch's membrane. Then other layers will be outer collagen, middle elastic, inner collagen, and the inner basement membrane of the retinal pigment epithelium. So where does the blood supply of the choroid come from? The blood supply of the choroid comes from mainly from the long ciliary arteries. So as we said, the choroid will be supplying it is the vascular layer of the eye. So it will be supplying the most of the ocular structures. So posteriorly they will supply the retina, and so through branches from the short posterior ciliary arteries and long posterior ciliary arteries. So we said that the short posterior ciliary arteries will pass through a short space into the suprachoroidal space, supplying the posterior surface or posterior aspect of the eye, while the long posterior ciliary artery will pass more into more distance within the suprachoroidal space and the supraciliary space to supply the anterior segment of the eye, while the anterior ciliary arteries again will be a part sharing in the formation of blood vessels or blood network of the choroid anteriorly. So here we see the anterior ciliary arteries will supply the choroid anterior with the insertion of recti, while posterior ciliary arteries, or either short or long ciliary arteries, will supply the choroid posterior to the insertion of recti. And here we come to an important anatomical vascular structure called the circulus iridis major. Circulus iridis major, it is like a arterial circle of anastomosis that is present in the ciliary body. This is one of the common tricks in the question. So although it is called iridis, but it is not located into the iris, it is located into the ciliary body. It is formed by anastomosis of the long ciliary arteries, as we can see here, and anterior ciliary arteries, as you can see here. These are the anterior ciliary arteries. So these are called the circulus iridis major, and we will know more about it into the iris. So just to know that the circulus iridis major, it is present in the ciliary body, formed by anastomosis of the long posterior ciliary artery and anterior ciliary arteries. The drainage of the venous supply of the eye is coming from the vortex veins. So we have four vortex veins, 2 superior and 2 inferior. The 2 superior will drain into the superior ophthalmic vein, while the 2 inferior will drain into the inferior ophthalmic vein, and both of them will drain into the cavernous sinus. So this is the venous drainage of any structure of the eye, from vortex veins, superior ophthalmic vein, inferior ophthalmic vein, and finally to the cavernous sinus. The nerve supply, so the choroid doesn't have a specific or sensory nerve supply, but the nerve supply to the choroid is coming to the blood vessels as a nerve supply to the wall of the blood vessel, which is called the vasa nervosa. So the blood vessels of the choroid receive the sympathetic innervation from the sympathetic root. And what is the sympathetic pathway within the eye? It comes from sympathetic root to the pass through the ciliary ganglion and does not relay, and then pass through the short ciliary nerves. So if I told you that any structure in the eye that is supplied by sympathetic, then this will be the same pathway. Through the sympathetic path, as a sympathetic route will pass to the ciliary ganglion. The ciliary ganglion is a parasympathetic ganglion, so the sympathetic route will not relay into the ciliary ganglion. Then as you can see here, this is the sympathetic, which is the blue one. So the blue one is continuous through the ciliary ganglion, and it will pass through the short ciliary nerves to supply the wall of blood vessels of the choroid.